Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. So today I am so excited because I am going to be doing a video that I have been wanting to do for months and I just haven't yet, and I'm so excited to finally be sitting down and doing it. So as you know, or if you don't know, Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy is my favorite book of all time. And I have talked about it so much on my channel that a lot of you, after hearing my ravings about it, decide to read it yourselves. And one of the most commonly asked questions that I get is, which translation should I read when someone decides to read Anna Karenina? And I have read two translations. I have about 8 different copies of Anna Karenina, but I have 3 different translations that I'm going to be talking about today. The 2 that I have read, the first read of Anna Karenina that I ever did was in this edition, and this is the Pan Macmillan Collector's Library edition, and the translation that is in this book is by Louise and Elmer Maude. The Maudes are actually the only translators that got Leo Tolstoy's stamp of approval of his translation, because they translated his work while he was still alive. So I wanted to begin with the Maude translation because it is the one that I knew Tolstoy approved of himself. And then the next translation that I read, it was my reread that I did for the Dickens versus Tolstoy debate, and that was the Penguin Classics edition, and this, oh, here's Willow. Hi! Do you have any comments? Do you have any translation comments? Thank you. Are you a Maude fan or a Pevear and Volokhonsky fan? Or a Garnett fan, Willow? What are her opinions? I don't know. And so I read the Pevear and Volokhonsky translation on my reread, and I really enjoyed it, though I have such a close connection to the Maude translation because it was my first read. So I always tell people that the first time I read Anna Karenina was in the Maude translation. The second time I read Anna Karenina was in the Pevear and Volokhonsky translation. They're both fantastic. The thing about translations is that they're personal preference. And so one person may prefer the Maude, one person may prefer the Garnett translation. I'm just going to be talking about the Maude translation, the Pevear and Volokhonsky translation, and the last translation that I have that I actually haven't read from is the Constance Garnett translation. And I know so many people love the Garnett translations, but I have heard mixed things. There are many opinions about translations, and that's why this video interests me and this topic interests me. I will also be leaving a link in the description to a really fantastic conversation that was between Pevear and Volokhonsky. They are a married couple, just as Louise and Elmer Maude were, so I love that these married couples translated Anna Karenina and a lot of other Russian literature. There is a wonderful video where they talk about the translation process. They talk about a lot of different Russian literature, different translators. Anyway, I'm going to be reading through the different translations, and you guys can decide which translation you prefer, because I know that every time I recommend someone to figure out which one they prefer, you have to go online and you have to find the different translations, and I thought it would be really nice and accessible if you want to potentially read Anna Karenina. You can watch this video and see which translation sounds the best to your ear. It's really, like I said, personal preference. Like, so much of reading, so much of literature is personal preference based. So I'm very excited. So I'm going to be reading you the first few paragraphs of the book in each translation, and then the second thing that I'm going to be reading to you in each translation is one of my all-time favorite scenes, and it is in part 1, chapter 9, and that is a scene between Levin and Kitty. Levin is our main character. He is my favorite fictional character on the face of the earth. I love him so much, and this scene is such a beautiful moment, and the writing is exquisite. So I thought it would be a perfect way to see how different translators treat a specific scene. So how they treat an opening and how they treat a specific scene is what I'm going to be going over today. So without any further rambling, I'm going to be starting with the Maude translation because, like I said, this is the first translation I read from and it holds a very dear place in my heart. This is the edition that I actually read the book from, so it just means the world to me to like hold it in my hands, and I love this copy so much. It's just one of my greatest possessions that I own. Okay, so Oh, I don't think I've read from this edition since first reading the book, which is so exciting. And one of my, sorry, I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent. One of my goals for life and in general is to reread Anna Karenina possibly every year in a new translation so that I can experience it in a new way every single time, which is the good thing about having a book that's translated is you have many different versions if it's something as beloved as Anna Karenina, where it's been translated so many times throughout history. So the first thing that I want to do is read you the first line of each translation so that you can see how the very iconic first line about unhappy families is written differently, and the different ways that the translators treat the same exact sentence. It's surprising how just changing a few different words or configuring a sentence in different ways can have such a great effect on your perception of the sentiments that are being discussed. So anyway, I am going to first be reading the Maude translation of the first line of Anna Karenina. So this is part 1, chapter 1 in the Maude translation. All happy families resemble one another, but each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Now the Pevear and Volokhonsky translation opens with, all happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. And then we have the Garnett translation, which I actually have never read from, so I am very intrigued to see how she puts it. Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. So when we look at the three translations together, we have the Maude's and Pevear and Volokhonsky starting with all happy families, and then they switch. So the Maude's say resemble one another, and the Pevear and Volokhonsky translation says are alike. Then we go on, the Garnett translation doesn't say all, it says happy families are all alike. The Maude's say, but each unhappy family, and then the Pevear and Volokhonsky say each unhappy family. And then the Garnett translation says every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way, is unhappy in its own way, and is unhappy in its own way. So they end with the same sentence of is unhappy in its own way, but they change a lot of the beginning. So I would love to know which translation of the first line you prefer, so definitely let me know in a comment. I don't know which one I prefer. I feel like I have such a soft spot for the Maude translation, but I don't know. They're all fantastic, and they all say the same thing, but say it differently, so it does have a different effect. Now I am going to read you, I think, the first 2 paragraphs of each translation, just so you see how they introduce you to the story. Again, I'm going to be starting with the Maude translation. Part 1, Chapter 1. All happy families resemble one another, but each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. Everything was upset in the Jablonskys' house. The wife had discovered an intrigue between her husband and their former French governess, and declared that she would not continue to live under the same roof with him. This state of things had now lasted for 3 days, and not only did the husband and wife, but the rest of the family and the whole household suffered from it. They all felt that there was no sense in their living together, and that any group of people who had met together by chance at an inn would have had more in common than they. The wife kept to her own rooms, the husband stopped away from home all day, the children ran about all over the house uneasily. The English governess quarreled with the housekeeper and wrote to a friend asking if she could find her another situation. The cook had gone out just at dinner time the day before and had not returned, and the kitchen maid and coachman had given notice. So we begin with the Jablonski house because of infidelity, because of Jablonski having an affair and being unfaithful to his wife. The house is in turmoil. So we begin with unhappy families. And why is the Jablonski family between Dolly is Jablonski's wife, Stiva and Dolly, why are they dealing with this situation? Because of infidelity. And so we immediately begin the story with the theme of infidelity, which is going to, of course, be related further on in the story. I love the way that this book opens. I think it's brilliant. I think it's just masterfully done. And that opening is one of the best openings I've ever read. So anyway, this isn't really supposed to be a video about the story of Anna Karenina. It's supposed to be about translation, but I just get so excited every time I read it, and I love Tolstoy. Tolstoy, I love you. I didn't refer to my Tolstoy t-shirt yet, but you guys know this is my Tolstoy is my homeboy shirt. He's holding up a peace sign. There we go. So that is the Maude translation. Again, I would love to know which translation you guys prefer after hearing the different ones. So now I will be reading the Pevear and Volokhonsky translation. Part 1, Chapter 1. All happy families are alike. Each unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. All was confusion in the Oblonskys' house. The wife had found out that the husband was having an affair with their former French governess, and had announced to the husband that she could not live in the same house with him. This situation had continued for 3 days now, and was painfully felt by the couple themselves, as well as by all the members of the family and household. They felt that there was no sense in their living together, and that people who meet accidentally at any inn have more connection with each other than they, the members of the family and household of the Oblonskys. The wife would not leave her rooms. The husband was away for the 3rd day. The children were running all over the house as if lost. The English governess quarreled with the housekeeper and wrote a note to a friend asking her to find her a new place. The cook had already left the premises the day before. At dinner time, the kitchen maid and coachman had given notice. What I find so interesting about this translation is that I think it's geared towards more of a modern reader, especially because this is a modern translation. When I was reading the Maude translation, it felt very fluid and easy to read. And I don't know if it's because I read so many classics that classics roll off my tongue, but I do read a lot of modern books and modern translations, so you'd think that it would roll off the tongue as well. But I do feel like I prefer the translation of the beginning in the Maude translation. So we'll see. Let's see how I feel about the Garnett translation. So this is the Constance Garnett translation of Anna Karenina. Part 1, Chapter 1. Happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. The wife had discovered that the husband was carrying on an intrigue with a French girl, who had been a governess in their family, and she had announced to her husband that she could not go on living in the same house with him. This position of affairs had now lasted 3 days, and not only the husband and wife themselves, but all the members of their family and household were painfully conscious of it. Every person in the house felt that there was no sense in their living together, and that the stray people brought together by chance at any inn had more in common with one another than they, the members of the family and household of the Oblonskys. The wife did not leave her own room. The husband had not been at home for 3 days. The children ran wild all over the house. The English governess quarreled with the housekeeper and wrote to a friend asking her to look out for a new situation for her. The man cook had walked off the day before, just at dinner time. The kitchen maid and the coachman had given warning. Now this also has more of a classic feel to it, so I feel like you can definitely tell that the Pevear and Volokhonsky translation is more modern, and that the Maude's and the Garnett translation are a bit older. Just the way that it's written, the diction and vocabulary that they use, and the way that they construct sentences does feel very classical. So like I said, totally personal preference. I do really like this translation. I feel like it is very charming. Does it feel like Tolstoy? No, I kind of feel like for me, I don't know if this is because I read the Maude translation first, but I feel like the Maude translation to me feels the most like Tolstoy. If that makes any sense, because it is a translation, it isn't Tolstoy, but again, Tolstoy did approve the Maude translation. So, interesting. Now I'm going to be reading you one of my favorite scenes from the book ever. Like I said, it's the skating scene when Levin sees Kitty, and it is from chapter 9. It is one of the most beautifully written scenes in my opinion, so I'm really excited to see how it translates in these different editions. So this is the Maude translation of Chapter 9 of Anna Karenina. At 4 o'clock that afternoon, Levin, conscious that his heart was beating rapidly, got out of the hired sledge at the zoological gardens and went down the path leading to the ice hills and skating lake, sure of finding Kitty there, for he had noticed the Shtcherbatskys' carriage at the entrance. It was a clear, frosty day. Carriages, private sledges, sledges for hire, and mounted police stood at the entrance. Well-dressed people, their hats shining in the sunlight, crowded at the gates and thronged the clean-swept paths between the little houses built with carved eaves in Russian style. The bushy birch trees in the garden, with all their branches weighed down by snow, seemed attired in new festive garments. He walked along the path leading to the skating lake, and kept repeating to himself, "I must not be excited. I must be quiet." "What are you doing? What's the matter? Be quiet, stupid," he said to his heart. But the more he tried to be calm, the more labored grew his breath. He met an acquaintance who called to him, but Levin did not even notice who it was. He approached the ice hills and heard the clanking of the chains by which the sledges were being pulled up, their clatter as they descended the hills, and the sound of merry voices. A few more steps brought him to the skating lake, and among all the skaters he at once recognized her. He knew she was there by the joy and terror that took possession of his heart. She stood talking to a woman at the other end of the lake. There seemed to be nothing striking in her dress or attitude, but it was as easy for Levin to recognize her in that crowd as to find a rose among nettles. Everything was lit up by her. She was the smile that brightened everything around. Can I really step down onto the ice and go up to her, he thought. The spot where she stood seemed to him an unapproachable sanctuary, and there was a moment when he nearly went away. He was so filled with awe. He had to make an effort and reason with himself that all sorts of people were passing near her, and he himself might have come just to skate. He stepped down, avoiding any long look at her, as one avoids long looks at the sun, but sees her as one sees the sun, without looking. Ah, God. Oh, God. I just have to read it again. He stepped down, avoiding any long look at her, as one avoids long looks at the sun, but seeing her as one sees the sun, without looking. I can't deal. So that is the Maude translation. Then we will do the Pevear and Volokhonsky translation. At 4 o'clock, feeling his heart pounding, Levin got out of a cab at the zoological garden and walked down the path towards the sledging hills and the skating rink, knowing for certain that he would find her there, because he had seen the Shtcherbatskys' carriage at the entrance. It was a clear, frosty day. At the entrance stood rows of carriages, sleighs, cabbies, mounted police, proper folk, their hats gleaming in the sun, swarmed by the gate and along the cleared paths, among little Russian cottages with fretwork eaves and ridges. The old curly-headed birches in the garden, all their branches hung with snow, seemed to be decked out in new festive garments. He walked down the path towards the skating rink and said to himself, "Mustn't be excited, must keep calm. What are you doing? What's the matter with you? Quiet, stupid," he spoke to his heart. And the more he tried to calm himself, the more breathless he became. An acquaintance went by and called out to him, but Levin did not even recognize who it was. He came to the hills where there was a clanking of chains, towing sledges up and down, the clatter of descending sledges, and the sound of merry voices. He walked on a few more steps, and before him opened the skating rink, and at once, among all the skaters, he recognized her. He knew she was there by the joy and fear that overwhelmed his heart. She stood at the other end of the rink, talking to a lady. There seemed to be nothing very special in her dress, nor in her pose, but for Levin she was as easy to recognize in that crowd as a rose among nettles. Everything was lit up by her. She was the smile that brightened everything around. Can I really step down there on the ice and go over to her? He thought. The place where she stood seemed to him unapproachably holy, and there was a moment when he almost went away. He was so filled with awe. Making an effort, he reasoned that all sorts of people were walking near her, and that he might have come to skate there himself. He stepped down, trying not to look long at her, as if she were the sun, yet he saw her like the sun, even without looking. So good, so good. He stepped down, trying not to look long at her, as if she were the sun, yet he saw her like the sun, even without looking. Amazing, amazing. I love both of those translations of that. I don't know if I have a preferred one. The Maudes, maybe. I just have a soft spot for the Maudes. Now this is the Garnett translation of chapter 9. At 4 o'clock, conscious of his throbbing heart, Levin stepped out of a hired sledge at the zoological gardens and turned along the path to the frozen mounds and the skating ground, knowing that he would certainly find her there, as he had seen the Sherbatskys' carriage at the entrance. It was a bright, frosty day. Rows of carriages, sledges, drivers, and policemen were standing in approach. Crowds of well-dressed people with hats bright in the sun swarmed about the entrance and along the well-swept little paths between the little houses adorned with carving in the Russian style. The old curly birches of the gardens, all their twigs laden with snow, looked as though freshly decked in sacred vestments. He walked along the path toward the skating ground and kept saying to himself, "You mustn't be excited. You must be calm. What's the matter with you? What do you want? Be quiet, stupid," he conjured his heart, and the more he tried to compose himself, the more breathless he found himself. An acquaintance met him and called him by his name, but Levin did not even recognize him. He went towards the mounds, whence came the clank of the chains of sledges as they slipped down or were dragged up, the rumble of the sliding sledges and the sounds of merry voices. He walked only a few steps, and the skating ground lay open before his eyes, and at once, amidst all the skaters, he knew her. He knew she was there by the rapture and the terror that seized on his heart. She was standing talking to a lady at the opposite end of the ground. There was apparently nothing striking, either in her dress or her attitude, but for Levin she was as easy to find in that crowd as a rose among nettles. Everything was made bright by her. She was the smile that shed light on all round her. Is it possible I can go over there on the ice, go up to her, he thought? The place where she stood seemed to him a holy shrine, unapproachable, and there was one moment when he almost retreated, so overwhelmed was he with terror. He had to make an effort to master himself and to remind himself that people of all sorts were moving about her, and that he too might have come there to skate. He walked down, for a long while avoiding looking at her as at the sun, but seeing her as one does the sun, without looking. Okay, again we have, he walked down, for a long while avoiding looking at her as at the sun, but seeing her as one does the sun, without looking. I find that so fascinating because I feel like it's the same scene, but it's treated so differently in the way that it's written. See, this is the first time I'm reading the Garnett translation, and I like it. I really like it, but it doesn't necessarily feel like Tolstoy. Pevear and Volokhonsky, they were talking about how when you read a Garnett translation, you're reading more Garnett than you're reading Tolstoy or any of her other translations. And I can sort of see that because the words that she uses, the way she uses them, does feel quite different. But again, you could say that about every translation. I am going to officially put my vote. I don't know. Okay, I didn't realize that this was going to be like me deciding which translation I like best. But out of the Maude, Pevear and Volokhonsky, and Garnett translation, I think I prefer the Maude translation out of all of them. So if anybody asks me now, because every time someone asks me, I never know which one I should recommend to someone reading it for the first time, I think I recommend the Maude translation. And I'm so glad that it was the first translation that I ever read of it. Ooh, this was fascinating! I think there is something to get out of each one of them. And like I said, I think it's wonderful that I get to re-experience my favorite book. And it's something new to experience every time. So I hope this video has helped you maybe figure out which translation of Anna Karenina you might want to read, or maybe do a reread of. Deciding which translation you should read, I think, depends on what you are after. Are you after a translation that's very faithful, or are you after a translation that's approachable? Are the two, I think, main points to ask yourself when going into a translated work. And the best thing to do, honestly, is what I just did, is to read different translations and to decide for yourself which one you prefer. A lot of people also ask me which they should start with, War and Peace or Anna Karenina, or they're wanting to read any classic and they're asking me which one I should read, and they give me a list of a few, and I always ask them, which one are you in the mood for? Or read the first page of each one and see which one hooks you more. So I really think this is dependent on your own enjoyment. I'm really excited that this video helped me decide my #1 winner, which is the Maude translation. I think that this is really exciting because now I finally have a solid answer to tell people when they ask me which is my favorite translation. But again, I think I might read the Garnett translation at some point this year, because I really would love to reread Anna Karenina every year in a different translation. So if that is something that you would like to do, possibly with me, I could maybe make it a read-along of a Carolyn Marie reads, for the 3rd time in a new translation, her favorite book ever, Anna Karenina. Would you care to join me, is basically what I would like to know. If not, no worries. I can of course read it by myself and film vlogs and anything. I know that we all have very busy reading schedules, but that is definitely something that I would maybe love to do and to host. Yeah, I hope you have enjoyed this video. I have loved filming this because anything to do with Anna Karenina and the writing of Anna Karenina and Tolstoy's language is just my favorite thing ever. So thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed, and let me know if you are reading Anna Karenina, if you want to read Anna Karenina, how you feel about Anna Karenina. Have you read it? If you have, what is your favorite translation? I would love to know. So I hope you are having a fantastic day, reading some amazing books, staying safe, happy, healthy, and I will see you soon in another video. Happy reading.